Blog Talk Radio.
Shut up. I'm about to get on the phone. Don't talk it.
Hello. Welcome to IDI Radio on the Met series. This is Shihan Salahuddin Al-Jaber, and I'm here with my good friend and partner in crime, Mr. Furqan Shabazz Mujahideen. Today we have a very special guest, Professor Darryl Sarjeant, who I believe is in Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken, via, I believe, New York City, Brooklyn, if I'm also not mistaken. How you doing, Mr. Sarjeant?
Oh, peace and blessings. How are you, sir?
Very good, very good. And as always, my co-host, Mr. Shabazz, how we doing, sir?
Very good, Shihan. Very good, sir.
All right, good, good. All right, Professor, hopefully everything is going well for you. I want to say thank you for taking the time out for our interview. Hopefully we won't take too much of your time out, but we know there's some stories about you and about Doc and your time in New York and your time in When Worlds Collide and other areas that we would like to touch. And I just want to say thank you again for coming on to our show. All right, and I just want to let the listeners know this is brought to you by www.senjokai.com, SenjoKai.com, or senjomartialarts.com, your premier Sanuk Jiu-Jitsu Academy located here in beautiful Atlanta, Georgia. All right, well, since we got through the formalities, let's go ahead and get this interview started, and we'll go ahead and let Mr. Shabazz take the lead.
All right. Good afternoon, good evening, Professor Sarjeant. I have 10 questions I'm just going to ask you. My first question is, when were you first introduced to Sanuk Israel?
Well, I started training in the systems back in the mid to late 80s. I started off with Soki Littlejohn back in his school in Harlem up on 123rd Street. And then when Doc came back around 1991, somewhere around that era, then a little while after that, maybe about 1992, I started working with him when he was teaching at When Worlds Collide. He was teaching a morning class at that time, and then, of course, he was teaching the Sunday classes where it was kind of like an all-star cast. A lot of the instructors and, everybody was coming down to train. So, yeah, around 1992 is when I started training with him down on the bottom of When Worlds Collide.
All right. Who were some of your influences in Sanuk Israel?
Well, I had many. I had the opportunity to learn from a lot because a lot of them were down there and they were teaching at that time. You had people like Grandmaster Shem and Professor Adam Battle. You had people like Professor Malik Shabazz, Grandmaster Anton Muhammad, Grandmaster Anthony, Soki Hassan, and then one of the most influential was my cousin, Grandmaster Billy Davis. So the training was great back then, and there was lots of good training and lots of learning going on.
Let me ask you this. What were some of the progressions in Sanuk Israel through the years?
Doc, when I started training with him, his injuries and his illness was not bothering him, so he was in movement. He was still able to move. I remember vividly watching the man drop down, do ukiwazas and tomonagis and all those things, and it kind of shocked me, watching him do that. So he was still at the point where he was still moving like that, doing the disappearing, stepping behind. You never knew where he was, and then, the next thing he would be sweeping you out or punching you in the back of your neck. Then, of course, the next phase was his injuries were starting to surface a little bit. So he was doing some less throws. He was doing some more pressure point work, and then, he was doing a combination of standing and sitting. And then, of course, he got to the point where he was doing a lot more sitting, and then after that time, of course, he was sitting pretty much 95% of the time.
I see. What are some of the similarities of Sanuk in Filipino, Indonesian martial arts?
Well, there's a lot. There's a definite emphasis on footwork, on angles, on the precise use of the angles. One of the biggest things is the entry and exit methodology. Doc used a lot of entry-exits as his philosophy, and his entries were very, very different in comparison to a lot of different systems that I had seen. Fluidity of movement, the emphasis on that, that is very common within the Filipino and Indonesian and even the African martial arts. A lot of course, those arts were based directly on dance, while the fluidity of movement, because of our background in a Filipino methodology from Professor V, we still remained or kept up with the fluidity of movement, that emphasis, the ability to translate empty hands into weapon movement. Although Doc would tell a lot of people that he wasn't an arnisador or any of that, Doc had a very, very good understanding of weaponry and how to translate the movement from his empty hand into weaponry. The philosophy of multiple opponents. Anytime you look really at what Doc was doing, you can pretty much say that we worked on multiple opponents, not just a singular opponent that was in front of you. I mean, we talked about that all the time, just in the simple thing that we always talked about leaving class, watch your back. There's always more than one. That's a very important thing that we dealt with as well. Simplistic and effective techniques. If you look at Filipino martial arts, they're not very long, elongated techniques. They're very short. They're very to the point. They'll enter in. They'll exit out with a throw, arm drag, a choke, whatever it is that they do. And that's very similar to the philosophy that we did with Doc. Doc had a very devastating entry at times, and then whatever exit he chose to utilize with a transition in between. Of course, when you look at a lot of Doc's entries, you saw muscle and limb destructions. He'd be hitting you in a muscle, or he'd hit you in a limb, and he would destroy that limb as he goes in, as he enters in. Or if it's a nerve center that he hits you in the arm and deadens out your arm on the entry, then that facilitates your exit. Allowing and expecting students to expand upon the core techniques. When I hear Doc a lot of times say that he was upset watching people do the same thing that they had done for years, there was no expansion, there was no growth, and so Doc spoke about that a couple of times when he was not happy with watching people do the same thing that they was doing years and years ago. He was growing, and in essence, he expected the students to grow as well. The implementation of the boxing, if you followed Filipino martial arts for any length of time, Filipino martial arts has a boxing, Eastern boxing influence. They call it panantukan, and the panantukan is combat kickboxing, low-line kicking. The boxing was not the boxing you find in Western boxing per se, although Doc had a substantial amount of Western boxing experience. He was boxing before he was into the Asian martial arts. And then the Pia forms. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir. Go ahead. Go into the Pia forms. I'm going to come back to my question on that. Yeah.
And then the Pia forms, when you look at them, many of them in nature look very, very similar to what we would call the Sayas or the Jurus in the other arts, in like the Filipino martial arts or in the Silat. The Pia forms were not very long, but there was a lot involved in them if you understand the principles and the concepts that go behind each of the forms.
Oh, and my question, I have a lot of respect for the Indonesian arts. As a matter of fact, in the Arnis, the Panantukan in Sanuk it's called touch and go, but in Filipino, isn't it called stacking? Have you heard the concept called stacking? No, the terms they really vary according to where your particular art forms came from. Professor V was born in Norte Ilocanos, and a lot of the training in Luzon had a very Spanish influence, and then you had the art forms that came from Cebu, from Leyte, and from Mindanao, and a lot of those smaller islands. So everybody has their own, what they say, vernacular, or their own things that they say. Stacking could be very well something that I know, but just not by that terminology. But the entry and the exit, like the core movements of Sanukis. I mean, when you put that up against the core movements of, let's say, the mano to mano, what's the comparative analysis on the two? I
find them to be similar and very congruent to that. I find that The biggest difference is that many of the training, the way that a lot of guys are doing it, they use that straight punch, the step-in straight punch, where, of course, when you're working Panantukan, you're doing everything from jab, cross hook, all of the kind of boxing combinations. So right from the beginning, that is the core of the training, right from the start. So it's a little bit different in regard to that. But as far as the actual entry-exit methodology, it would be congruent. It would be the same as you are doing within the Filipino and some of the Indonesian martial arts systems.
Right. Listen, Professor, to stay on that question, how similar is, would you say, because Doc studied Bundo with Dr. Manji quite extensively. He called Bundo one of his favorite systems, along with AirPod, because American Kempo Karate. As a matter of fact, these are the only two martial arts that I ever heard Doc ever talk about on video outside of his own teacher. So Bundo, they have a kickboxing aspect, which they call Fang or something like that, which is Burmese kickboxing. And of course, Muay Thai kickboxing, and then you got Filipino combat. How similar are those arts? Do you see Bundo influences on what Doc does, or do you see some of Mr. V's Filipino roots in what Doc does? What do you see in what he's doing?
I say yes. I've seen, other than, I haven't seen too much of the Thai influence in it, but let me change one thing. Doc did not train directly with Dr. G from Dr. G's own mouth. I believe he trained with Dr. G's dad. I'm not positive about that, but he also trained with a student of Dr. G that was out by the Detroit area, as far as I understand as well. Dr. G knew of him very well, and he respected him and liked him. I had the opportunity to train with Dr. G a little bit and got insight on some of that. But as far as the kickboxing and stuff like that from Bundo, I hadn't seen so much the kickboxing influence as the methodology behind the boxing, not a Western boxing thing, a more Southeast Asian boxing influence where Doc can come out of the boxing and he can slip and move and he can bob and weave out, but as he's doing it, when he wants to, he can hit you as he's moving. He can destroy the muscle and stuff like that as he's doing it. So there's a lot of influence from that perspective in there, whether it came directly from that or if it came from his experience with Strato. It's hard to say. So, but there's a lot of similarities in the influence behind Doc's boxing.
So you would definitely agree that that cross training in like a mile to mile, like that would be an excellent complement to your Sanukas training.
If you choose to do that, I know many people do not choose to go outside the confines of Sanukas, which is their choice, and that's fine. But if you were to do something like that and go cross-train, then yes, I believe that it would fit very well, and the principles and the concepts are similar. They're more similar than not, and you would have a easy time being able to translate that which Doc shared and see where a lot of the influences came from.
All right, my next question is this. Do you find that the principles and concepts taught by Dr. Powell are applicable in other arts?
Oh, yeah. The biggest thing about principles and concepts, when you train in a principle and conceptual-based methodology, then you don't go by just this technique. If this technique doesn't work, you're lost. Working in principles and concepts, the principles are universal. If you understand how to utilize your principles in the appropriate fashion, then your principles, they will interchange or they're intertwined with whatever martial art you choose to do, whether it's jiu-jitsu, karate, kempo, the Southeast Asian arts, the African arts, it doesn't matter. Principles are universal. And when you go by the concepts, of course, the concepts comes by many people's personal experience. And when you look at the concepts of Sanukas, they're very street-oriented. So when you look at the Filipino and Indonesian arts, you'd find that they are very street-oriented, and the concepts that Doc had, although different because they were individualized for him, they're similar. and many of and all of those things are applicable for any art that you do.
Gosh. My next question is, what technical differences have you noticed between Comite Rule and Sanuk Rule?
My biggest thing with that would be that Soki used his experience as an educator. You know, Soki was an educator in the New York Board of Education for many years. Really doesn't matter whether it was elementary school, middle school, junior high school, or high school. He was an educator for many years, and he used that to develop the structure for his system. You know, everywhere from his 1 to 10 to his different sets: palm set, knife hand, elbow, hammer fist, knee, you know, wall, floor, etc., etc. He used that and he put that in a structure that he felt comfortable with from his experience with the Vijitsu and the old Sanukis that he had learned from Doc. And then Doc's thing to me, it was just unstructured greatness. It was his ability to draw from the universe. He spoke about being able to draw from the universe, and by doing that, and kind of not going so much into, at least at the stage where I got to him, he was not doing like these long sets in terms of the elbow set is done this way, you have to do it in this particular precise manner. You know, Doc had a very free-flowing thing. Now, in Comite Rule, when you get to a certain point, that comes into play as well. It's just that Doc taught it at an earlier stage in terms of you know, hit pressure point, take this joint lock, pop a chin, hit you in the throat, take you down, you know. And it might be a different thing. You might have to learn a little bit more of a precise technique when you're working with Soki in the beginning until you get to the point where he feels that you're able to start working with your own particular flow.
Oh, sure. Let me ask you this. Did you ever have the opportunity to train with Professor V, and what was it like, and how was his spirit?
Yeah, I had a chance to train with Professor V several times. I had a chance to attend some of his morning classes when he was on Atlantic Avenue before they moved to Park Place down by the World Trade Center. That was, you know, Atlantic Avenue was legendary for Professor V. So I had a chance to train in some of the morning classes with him. And it was a virtual who's who, to be honest with you, in Vijitsu. At any time, any day, any of the great Vijitsu masters, you know, or really any master of any art, they might walk through the door just to say hi and sit there and hang out and visit and watch class and or be on the floor themselves training. And so that was a great experience working with Professor V. You know, since I was new to the lineage when I had started doing that, the time that I began with his classes, it was phenomenal. You know, you never know what to expect from day to day. Some days were the older Vijitsu where, you know, we were doing some of the short sets. We would do some of the 1 through 24 or some of that. You know, Professor would change up daily. And some days we'd work on the Viornis. And I was just amazed by the power, you know, that he had, being that he was so small in stature. The power that he had. You know, one day he hit me in the back of the neck, and my neck was out of submission for a good month and a half. I had a knot on the back of on my back, the back of my neck. You know, but he had a true warrior spirit. You know, our lineage really can't deny the fact that it has drawn from a more Filipino philosophy, meaning that Professor V's whole perspective retained much of the Filipino cultural ways. You know, in allowing so many expressions of Vijitsu. That's something that Filipino martial arts do. You know, that at a time a teacher wants their students to go out and to develop their expression, giving students the blessings to develop their own systems. At a point in time, I believe that Doc allowed some people to do that, to go out and develop their thing. And at times I remember that he wasn't happy about them going out and developing their thing. So Doc, you know, he had different feelings about different things, maybe with different people. Some of his main students have their own system. And some of them have stayed strictly the teachings or to Sanukus per se, and then adding the Arnis as he grew in it. Professor didn't really start really focusing on the V Arnis as the mainstay until the mid '80s. I believe it was about 1984. And then the V Arnis Jitsu, that was born, where Professor Grandmaster now David James now is the heir to that, and Professor had taken out some of the elements that everybody before that were very used to, that helped make V-Jitsu, what it was before that time.
Mm.
What have you found that
Hey, Shabazz, we can't hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
yes.
there you go. Go ahead.
Yeah, I said, what have you found as unique qualities in Sanukas as compared to traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu?
We could start off with the mindset of the training. Doc, being that Doc was right from the street, he brought that mindset into his training. He brought the street mindset into everyday class. And so when you look at traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, and for the most part, it could be that some instructors did that, but for the most part, you'd find that they stayed more in the cultural aspect of that thing. The entries of Sanukas that we talked about before are extremely unique in comparison to any of the traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu systems. Doc doing muscle destructions or trapping or how he utilized the combination of blocking and striking simultaneously. All those things are very different in pure traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu. The implementation of Doc's boxing and his footwork from the Arnis and even Bando and Kung Fu and all those things, how he implemented those things into his teaching. All of those things are very different from what you'd find in traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu. His drawing of info from various sources, boxing, Bando, Kung Fu, the Arnis, Karate, Aiki, etc., all those things, how he put those things or implemented those things in to Sanukas, make it very unique in comparison to what you'd find in strict Japanese jiu-jitsu. And at some stages of Sanukas, when there was a lot more overkill philosophy, those things, of course, are different. Bringing in the culture of America or African Americans, to be more precise. When you bring in the culture that we have, our culture is different than that you find in Japan. And Doc brought that in by his everyday life, allowing his personal experience to permeate through his teachings. All those things make it very different than what you would find in traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Nice. How does the training of Sanukas carry over into your everyday life?
It's very important. To me, it was the way of bringing in the spirituality. Spirituality is prevalent all through Sanukas. If one's connected with their spiritual walk. And we know that Doc was Muslim, and his teachings assisted in the philosophy, creativity, and his everyday walk. When I look at my personal spiritual walk, I see correlations with the training all the time. Look at when Doc speaks of drawing from the universe. I find that as his connection with spirit, whether it's his connection with the ancestors or just connection straight to the Creator. It was his connection with spirit that allowed him to do some of the things that he did. He would tell you all the time, I don't know what I'm going to do until it's being done. The inner spirit. When I look at this, all martial arts is meant to build the inner spirit. It's meant to build your character and your integrity. To walk in the highest character and integrity that you can, it leads to achieving the highest destiny that you're supposed to achieve here on this earth. And to know what you're here on earth to accomplish, and then to be able to reach that pinnacle. Doc was able to reach his highest destiny from my perspective, because we can't deny that Doc was here to lay his teachings down and to leave those teachings to us before he made his transition into the realm of the ancestors. I believe that it wasn't a mistake, and it was meant to be that Dr. Powell entered into our lives, whether for a reason or a season, and that we are really blessed to have had the opportunity for him to be a part of our lives. When we look in the African tradition, our ancestors are venerated. We give honor to the ancestors upon whose footsteps we walk and whose ideas we fly. Well, we walk upon the steps. We follow those things of Doc as an ancestor now. We honor them for their accomplishments. We release the ancestors from any mistakes that they made. We finish the work that they laid the foundation for. And it is my prayer that his spirit will guide our paths to continue to expand on where we are, in our art and in our lives. So there's a lot of spirituality. There's a lot. That's how I feel that it works within me. That's how I see it in regard to being as one with spirit as you're working and learning your art.
Well, my last question is a lot of things you're saying, man, it reminds me, because when you talk about Doc being connected with the universe, it reminds me of an interview with Professor Rockman, and he said how Doc would see a cat running across the mat, and he would see a technique in that, or how he would see Matador from the bullfighting. So that interview correlates with what you're saying with his spiritual inclination. So my last question with you is, I asked Senior Grandmaster the other day, Anaconda, in an interview. I said, how would you sum up Sanuk's rule on the highest level in terms of his combat? But the question I'm going to ask you is, and I'm just going to pretext this with this. The other day I was talking to Hosoki Hassan, and he was telling me that Doc told him that, like you said, Sanuk basically has an entry and an exit, and that Sanuk is the element of creation. And that from that, what you know in the middle, once you come in, is up to you. So my question to you is, how would you sum up and kind of flowing off the concept of element of creation, how would you sum up the Sanuk's philosophy of the power at its highest level? And that'll be my last question for you for the night.
So are we talking about in terms of a physical level? Because on the physical level, it would be the highest form that you should come to as far as your mentality for the street. Doc always talked about getting off first. That was the thing that he spoke of in Sanuk's, get off first. The bottom line was that Doc, through his experiences in life, through his experiences in his earlier days dealing with what he had to deal with, he brought all of those elements of the fight into Sanuk's. And so my biggest thing would be it would be the mentality of the fight, or bringing that mentality into the training. No matter what you do on a physical level, 90% of your training is on a mental level. If you go in and you're going and having to deal with a situation, defending yourself, then a lot of it is, are you able to get past the fear factor? Are you able to work past the flight or fight? And so Doc, in his teaching, brought a lot of that mentality into it. He put the pressure on you. His training was rigorous. His spiritual walk, he tested you spiritually, mentally, physically, every class that you took with him. And so I believe that it is those things that really solidified things in terms of the training for Sanuk's. At least that is my vantage point. Many people have their own vantage point as to what they received and what they took from their training with Doc. And I believe that everything is an individualistic thing. Every individual has their own destiny, and that every individual will take what it is that they saw as the most useful elements to be taken from anybody. And so for me, Doc had a profound influence on me and what it is that I do and did back then. And, I believe those elements that we just shared, I believe those things were the things that make my experience with Sanuk unique.
Man, it was a great. It was a professor. This is actually one of my favorite interviews. I mean, you're a deep brother and very precise, and you come with a lot of meat in your conversation. And I just want to thank you for the time, that you gave us for the interview. And I'm gonna let Shihan wrap it up from here.
No problem. Absolutely. Professor, I do have one thing I want to ask you. It has nothing to do with the jiu-jitsu or the snooker. Just briefly. For some people that are confused and who are not familiar with Filipino martial arts, so this is going to be dealing with Filipino. The difference between the names of Kali, Eskrima, or Eskrima, and Arnis, and the difference, not as far as the technique, but the names, or are they individual arts, or are they three different names for the same thing, or are they actually, completely separate entities? Just for those people that are not familiar with the Filipino martial arts and really get confused with the three terms.
No problem. It's according really to where you're from, where your art is from. In the northern places, each area had their own name for a similar thing. So you have a lot of different names. More so in the northern Luzon, the islands up north, you would find Arnis, or you'd find Pakali or Didya. Where Professor V was born in Ilocano, they call it Didya, Didya. You had the Arnis, which meant harness of the hands, and you find that more in the northern. In Cebu, Elete, you would find that in those middle islands. They would call it eskrima, and eskrima, I believe, was a French word for fencing. And then you have Kali. Now, Kali, there's a very big, there's a lot of dissension in whether the word Kali is the appropriate term.
Yes,
some people say it would be Kalis. Kalis means sword, and Silak would be the empty hand movements of the sword. So in the southern Philippines, Kalis, Kuntao, Silak, and all that would be the terminology that I have learned that they use down there. A lot more Kuntao than the Silak, the Kali. But the Kali would mean the movements of the sword, if you follow it that way. Some people also use it as the goddess from India, where when you see the goddess, it has several arms, and they say when the weapon is in movement, that it's like being hit by all of those arms from the Indian goddess.
Oh, good. Well, listen, Professor, I want to say thank you for the interview. If you can go ahead and give a plug out to your school, contact information, including email, and anything else, please feel free to do it now. Tell the people how to contact you and where to reach you.
Oh, well, thank you. They can find me at SilentWarriorArtsFederation.com. They can also give me a call on my cell phone if they want to, 405-642-1450. I'm out here in Oklahoma City, and the system is not out here. And so it is my hope and my prayer that as time goes by, more and more people will be exposed. I look to start teaching the jiu-jitsu side again. I'll be teaching in Chicago in a couple of weeks, out there teaching a combat jiu-jitsu class, and then also teaching a separate class in the Kali Silak. So there's a seminar out there. And so, people are always welcome to get in contact with me. Again, I understand that everybody has their personal experience with Doc, and I also understand that people have their own philosophies of what they ascertained out of Sanukis. And the only thing that I wanted to share today was my particular experience, my particular feeling, and my particular thought process of what I got from what Doc shared with me. And, Doc, as being the legend that he is, he was a pioneer, and he set the tone for a lot. And I hope and I pray that everybody will continue doing the work that he's laid out upon for all of us, and that we will get past some of the the things that are going on, and that everybody will begin to work together as family, and that, Sanukis will then be able to go to a different level once family, unites and everybody works together as one. And it is my prayer that happens, and that everybody will see the importance of working within the confines of family.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well said. Very well said. Perfect words to take us out. I want to say thank you to Professor Darryl Sarjeant, New York/Oklahoma City. And I also want to thank my co-host, Shabazz. As always, very, very pertinent questions. And as always, you do an exceptional job. This is brought to you by SinjoKai.com or SinjoMartialArts.com, your premier Snooker's Rule Dojo located here in beautiful Atlanta, Georgia. As always, Mr. Darryl Sarjeant, you're considered a friend of the Sinjo, and you're more than welcome to always come and by and visit us, or send an email, or maybe set up a second interview anytime, or just call and just say hello sometimes. We consider you a good friend and an ally and a brother in this art of Snooker's Rule. All right,
well,
once again, want to say thank you to Mr. Sarjeant. Thank you, listeners, for once again a very, very in-depth episode of On the Mat Eye to Eye series. And with that, we're going to end it. Each one teach one, and eye to eye,
heart to heart,
heart to heart, to the wall and back. Well, take care. All right, this is brought to you by, once again, www.sinjokai.com. This is Shihan Salahuddin. I am the Dojo Joe, or head instructor here at the Sinjokai Dojo, where we teach the art of Sanuk Jiu-Jitsu as taught by Dr. Moses Powell, Grandmaster Juno Alfarano, and Grandmaster Carol Muhammad Little. A very discreet and simple system of self-defense that the first day you show up, you can learn something that can save your life. You can visit us at www.sinjokai.com or www.sinjomartialarts.com. You can reach me by sending me an email at sinjomartialart, without an S at the end, at gmail.com, or simply visit our website and go to the contact tab, and you'll see the ways to reach me. You can also reach me at 404-936-3764, which is my personal cell phone number. Once again, it's our pleasure trying to bring you the most intense and respectable interviews that we can put out there, and to keep the art of Dr. Moses Powell alive, and to let people know that this man that passed away passed away in 2005, his art won't be forgotten, and neither will the man. All right, and with that, we will leave you eye to eye, heart to heart, to the wall and back.